I'm Sam Scove. I cover space for Politico. I'm here with General Guetlein, Vice Chief of Space Operations. I'd say it's probably never a more exciting time to start covering space than now. There's a lot going on. Our adversaries are increasingly competitive with us. We are making moves as well. I'll preface this by saying I'm sure there's a lot of things that are classified or sensitive, but right off the top, on the topic of Golden Dome, This is going to be a tremendous amount of work. It's a big effort with potentially big rewards. Are you able to give us any sort of progress update in terms of where we stand on the planning process, on sort of where you see Golden Dome going?
I think from a planning perspective, we are in full planning mode. We owe an answer back to the White House by, I believe, the end of the month on what our thoughts are. We're spending a lot of time really talking about architectures. What might the different levels of architecture look like, depending on the threat that we want to protect and defend the United States against. We are talking about what organizations need to be involved in Iron Dome. This will not be one organization to rule all organizations. It's going to have to be an integration of multiple organizations across multiple agency boundaries. So how do you organize to do that? What's that governance structure look like? And then what capabilities do you want to bring into that portfolio to start focusing on homeland defense?
You raised an interesting point there, and you were at MDA before.
Correct.
There's a lot of different players that could have a role in here in this. What do you see the sort of responsibilities being per agency? I mean, should Space Force take control? Should MDA lead? How will that work?
So that hasn't been decided yet,
Yeah.
How that's going to work. But it's going to have to be the integration of all those organizations, because missile defense is extremely good at the ballistic threat. Missile defense agency is really good at integration of systems integration. Missile defense is really good at test. They have a very robust modeling and simulation capability for their capabilities. So they will have a heavy role in what we're doing. But the Space Force will also have a heavy role because we have all of the space-based capabilities. We have proliferated LEO satellites for communications and sensor-to-shooter communications. We have proliferated sensors to do global awareness of what's going on. We have the missile warning, missile defense sensors on orbit as well. All of that kit has got to come together and be integrated in a systems-to-systems type fashion, which means you've got to bring multiple organizations and multiple agencies, to include agencies like the NRO, because they also have capabilities on orbit that we want to bring to bear on the protection of the homeland. So all of that needs to come together into a integrated fashion.
And as you start that planning on Iron Dome, what does it look like in terms of your communication with those agencies to make sure that you're covering ground that's appropriate for your organization and sort of working to build together, if at all, in that planning process?
We are all talking. Everybody's talking. And the good news is the Space Force has already crafted most of these partnerships in the past. We have a very robust partnership with Missile Defense Agency. We share our missile warning data with them to tip and cue their systems. We have a very robust relationship with the National Reconnaissance Office. They are actually building a lot of our capabilities. Resilient radar system, GMTI, Silent Barker, which is on orbit situational awareness program, MILNET, which is a mesh network in space. We've already built those relationships. Now it's how do you connect all these pieces together seamlessly to go after homeland defense, where we may have been collaborating really good on the Pacific. Now we want to really bring that relationships to bear on protection of the homeland.
And I imagine, another interesting historical factor here is we've actually had a lot of real-life cases of missile defense across the world in the last couple of years. We see it all the time in Ukraine. There was the Iranian strikes or attempted strikes in Israel. And I imagine more than ever you were working with those organizations to coordinate or at least to take lessons learned. So when you look at those historical events, what sort of lessons can you take from that into missile defense for the homeland?
Yeah, that's a good question. So if you look at the threats that we're going against, they're not abstract threats. These are not something we're thinking could happen. These are threats that we've seen happen on a day-to-day basis. If you go back and look at the events in Iran in April of last year and October of last year, where they launched a barrage of over 300 missiles at Israel, it was our missile warning capability in the United States, operating out of Buckley Space Force Base in Colorado, Denver, that was alerting not only our own forces of the impending missile attack, but also of the Israelis and our other international partners, but also handing that data off to the shooters so that we could take those missiles out before they caused harm. So these are not, threats that we're just thinking about. These are threats that we're seeing every single day. Whereas our architecture was originally built for the strategic mission of protect the homeland against a nuclear deterrence or a nuclear attack, they're now having to be used in a very tactical manner in the Middle East, as we're seeing with Iran. So those relationships become absolutely key. I need to exercise together. I need to integrate the developments together. We need to be able to make sure I can pass data from a missile warning sensor out at GEO, 22,000 miles away, to an aircraft en route to shoot that down seamlessly without having to have man in the loop. Those are the lessons learned that we had been practicing for. Those are the lessons learned that we saw were necessary in April and then fully brought to bear in the October events.
And when you look towards the creation of Golden Dome, obviously there's a lot of different moving parts. There's the actual interceptors, there's the sensors, there's the command and control systems, there's obviously just the muscle memory of getting people trained up, personnel. What do you see as sort of the most likely biggest challenge from the perspective of delivering something quickly and relatively affordably? I'm sure it's going to be expensive. But.
Without a doubt, our biggest challenge is going to be organizational behavior and culture. We are not accustomed to having to integrate at the level that's going to be required to integrate to go after Iron Dome. This is on order of magnitude of the Manhattan Project. It's going to take a concerted effort from the very top of our government. It's going to take a national will to bring all this together. It's going to be a heavy lift across all the organizations that are going to be participating. And what we've got to really push back on are the organizational boundaries and the cultures that are going to try to slow us down or to prevent us from talking together.
And could you elaborate a little bit on that in terms of those organizational boundaries? I feel like there's been a little bit of talk of saying, we need to push acquisition people to go harder or faster. Is that what needs to happen? What are those boundaries?
No. The organizational boundaries, so Missile Defense Agency is really good at the ballistic threat, protection of the homeland from a ICBM. They are not good at building space capabilities. The Space Force is great at building space capabilities, but we're not great at doing missile defense. That's not our job. Counter UAS, that's not a space job or a missile defense job. That's really the Air Force, Navy, and the Army. How do I bring them to bear? We've also got to break down the barriers of Title 10 and Title 50, so the DoD and the intelligence community. How do I take advantage of those exquisite intelligence sensors in a time-relevant manner and get that data to the shooter in a manner of time that can actually deter the attack, if you will.
And who do you see as who is the linchpin in terms of leading that effort? To a certain degree, the services can do it, and in cases like Iran, they're going to have an actual real-life example where they're going to be forced into it. But how do we lead that without the sort of emergency circumstances of actual combat?
I think it's got to be an all-government reporting directly to the DepSecDef or the SecDef with full presidential support.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of ways that sort of Space Force is changing and some of the priorities that the service has laid out, there's more and more talk about space control and space superiority. So not just managing space-based assets, but actively interdicting Chinese or Russian space-based assets. There's some doctrine being worked on that right now. I'm just going to leave the floor to you based on the classification, but what can you tell us about that? Especially, do you imagine lots of kinetic space-based capabilities put in orbit?
I do not think that's off the table. Under the concept of competitive endurance, which the CSO talks about a lot, there's three LOEs underneath there. First is deny operational surprise, which means we cannot be surprised by the adversary's actions. We need to know what's going and what's coming. The second one is deny first mover advantage. Because space is so large and because we don't have a lot of capabilities in space to protect and defend ourselves, there's really a significant first mover advantage that those that throw the first punch have a significant advantage over the adversary. So we got to prevent that from happening. And the third one that he talks about is responsible counter space campaigning. That is the overall encompassing for space control. So if you go down those three efforts, in order to deny operational surprise, I need to have more proliferated space-based capabilities, space domain awareness to understand what's going on. We have it in every other domain. We don't have enough in space. How do I get more space domain awareness? And that's going to come through partnerships with industry and partnerships with our allies to get more eyes in the sky, if you will. The second one is, how do I deny first mover advantage, which means I now need to have resiliency built into our capabilities. Some of that may be onboard resiliency, but more of it's going to be through proliferation, through redundancy, through excess capacity. That again comes through partnerships with commercial, partnerships with our international allies, because we know we can't build enough kit to give us everything we need on orbit simultaneously right out of the gate. So we're going to have to partner our way through that. Then that last lane is, once I can deny operational surprise and prevent first mover advantage, I need to have credible capabilities to hold red at risk and credible capabilities to ensure I can deter an attack. That's really where we're getting into counter space. What does that kit look like? That's what we're in the throes of trying to determine.
And obviously, because this is a new and emerging field, those producers are either just coming online, they're often new companies in some cases. How do you sort of evaluate the state of industry for answering those emerging needs? Are we where we need to be, or is there a lot more that needs to be done?
We are nowhere where we need to be, nor have we ever been in the past. However, there is more innovation coming out of industry today than there has been since the push to the moon. An enormous amount of innovation coming out of industry, which has allowed us to really expand those partnerships with industry to look at what's in the realm of the possible. There's innovation coming out in the way we communicate, the way we protect and defend, the way we share data, et cetera, and we're trying to take advantage of all that.
Are there any areas in there that you feel are less advanced or need yet more investment? I mean, specifically when it comes to some of those sensors, I could imagine being interested in yet more.
I think where we as a nation need more investment is, we have spent the last several decades becoming very efficient in the way we fight and very efficient in our industrial base. Meaning I am, in many cases, one company deep on some level of technology or some level of capability. We have got to expand our industrial base to be more than just one deep, and we've got to get comfortable with inefficiency in our industrial base, which means I may need lights out capacity. I got the same thing with my labor market. I don't have enough technical labor in the United States to feed all of the innovation that's coming out of industry today. We've got to grow our workforce and the technical competencies of our workforce to have that excess capacity. But that is against our culture right now, because we are all about efficiency, not necessarily about effectiveness.
I mean, there's an interesting point there about acquisition too, which is, a lot of people have talked already at this conference about, how to improve acquisition and push people. And to an acquisition officer, there's a push to get the thing that's cheapest, most efficient, not necessarily something that supports a small company out there to diversify the supply base. How do you change the culture for acquisition professionals such they're incentivized, or is it a top leadership challenge?
You have to change the incentive structure. Having spent 34 years in acquisitions, I will tell you, your acquirers are extremely well trained, very bright. They all have, most of them have technical degrees. They know how to do their job. But the system of rewards that we have in place culturally across the government as well as in society is to deliver on cost and on schedule at the expense of performance. When you do that, your acquirers do everything they can do to possibly reduce the risk on their program. Risk to funding instability, risk to technology insertion, risk to oversight. So they spend a lot of time defending their programs, trying to keep the good ideas out. And we've got to change that equation. Instead of making them responsible for delivering a widget on cost and on schedule, make them responsible for delivering a capability to the field that the warfighter can use tonight. You will get a completely different answer. And you will start embracing the innovation walking into your program rather than trying to defend innovation out of your program.
And what sort of top-down changes need to have that? I mean, is that a matter of you sort of indicating this to acquisition professionals and saying, hey, I'm standing behind you? Or is there a role for Congress or other parts of the government to play when it comes to that?
I think all the above. We've got to become more risk tolerant. When a program manager embraces innovation and innovation fails, we can't fire that individual. We have to reward that individual and say, dust them off and try again. Just bring it to me faster. Don't worry about the 100% solution. Focus on the 70% solutions. How do I get that capability to the warfighter or to the nation as fast as I possibly can? We got to reward that behavior. It comes from the behavior and the laws that we have in place. It becomes from the defense acquisition executive, the service acquisition executives. It comes from the program executive officers, and we got to keep pushing that incentive structure further and further down to allow them to innovate. If you look at the guardians that we are bringing on today, our younger generation, they are chomping at the bit to innovate. They have been exposed to this technology their entire time growing up. They had an iPad in their hand at 6 months old, right? They want that. They want to embrace it. We've got to take advantage of that curiosity and that desire early on and not beat it out of them so that when they grow up to be PEOs or program managers, they understand how to innovate. And we have built the system of rewards and balances to allow them to innovate.
And presumably so that they stay in the force too, and they
Yes.
don't cycle out. On that topic, it seems like services are increasingly working with the COCOMs to
Yes.
get, live. This is an actual warfighter who's going to, or a person facing a real life geostrategic threat. Can you talk a little bit about what sort of lessons you've learned, or how that interaction has gone? Because I imagine you're doing the same.
It goes really well, and we try to do as much as we possibly can. Because when I expose the combatant commands to the acquisition problem and they understand what the constraints are and how hard it is to implement all the laws that are put on you and how the funding stability and all that affects it, they start to have a different demand signal. But when I take my acquirers and I send them into the combatant commands and they understand how that kit's going to be used, understand what the warfighter actually needs to get ingrained into that warrior ethos, if you will, that we've been talking so much about, they also come back with a different sense of urgency and a different perspective on how they're going to deliver capability to the field. So getting those two communities to talk more is hugely beneficial. Within a Space Force, what we're trying to do is actually stand up our units integrated from the beginning. So I have the operator and the acquirer sitting side by side, exchanging leadership roles, but the entire unit is a mixture of acquirers and operators.
And obviously, Space Force is growing, it has a lot of needs. At the same time, we're in a restricted budget environment. Mm-hmm. When it comes to this 8% reallocation, how will that affect where Space Force goes? Is it you drop some things, or is it perhaps you go more slowly?
Both. I think as you reallocate the 8%, there's going to be 8% things that are going to accelerate and 8% of things that are going to slow down. I will tell you, even the Space Force, we're only 3% of the DoD TOA. We are the smallest force with the largest AOR and the smallest budget. Even within that constrained environment, you still have opportunities to optimize where you're spending your money. There's a few studies out there from McKinsey and other organizations that say most organizations have at least 20 to 40% inefficiency built into their structure. And the objective is to try to define that. So when you look at 8%, 8% is going to hurt in some places, but 8% is going to help in other places.
And where would that 8% help? Like which types of programs do you feel like actually might end up accelerating based on these sort of shifts?
From a space perspective, we are woefully underfunded in protect and defend. So that's probably where you're going to see some of it. We are also going to look at are there legacy systems that we can possibly divest. We're kind of going through that pecking order as well to make sure that the capabilities that we deliver at the end of the day are going to be the most optimal, most effective capabilities we possibly can.
And on those legacy systems, I mean, to what degree do you see the increasing commercial availability of space tech? To what degree can those take the place of those legacy systems?
There is a lot of opportunity there. We have a charge out. So we have a commercial space strategy that we published last summer. In that commercial space strategy, we have challenged all the PEOs and the senior program managers to go across their entire portfolio and look for opportunities to offload requirements that we are currently trying to build and offload them into a capability that's already exists either in our commercial or in our allies. Under the construct of what we're trying to do in the Space Force is exploit everything we possibly have first and foremost. Can I connect it, integrate it, network it in new and innovative ways never thought about before? Second thing is buy as much as I possibly can. Only then, let's go build what we absolutely have to, what we must. So we are trying to look at every requirement we possibly can to shift away from building it internally to buying it externally.
And I imagine, like with everything, there's some challenges there. Some things didn't work out. It's always a nice idea to buy something commercial, but certainly there are instances where things don't work out. Have you found any of those instances yet? And if so, what kind of have you learned from either maybe making the requirements process clear or, yeah?
We really haven't found anything that doesn't work that way. We found some that we can do more efficiently and more effectively. We could have wrote the contract a little bit better, et cetera. But for the most part, right today, SATCOM is our most robust. We're buying an enormous amount of SATCOM. And we know that the SATCOM that I can afford during times of peace is not the SATCOM I need during times of crisis or conflict. So we stood up the commercially augmented space reserve and are actually working with our commercial partners to say, how do I put in place a relationship and a contract structure during peacetime to guarantee you additional capacity during times of crisis or conflict without waiting for that crisis or conflict to start that conversation. So SATCOM right now is kind of leading the way. I think the second one is space domain awareness. We have what we call the Joint Commercial Operations Cell, which we have now in 3 countries. We have one here in the United States, one in New Zealand, and one in UK in the follow the sun kind of mode. And we're sharing data with, last time I heard, 15 different allied partners. And we have all of the commercial operators operating on the floor simultaneously, giving us exquisite space situational awareness of what's going on in orbit. We're also just now starting into tactical surveillance, reconnaissance, and tracking, which is using commercial to give me space domain awareness on the ground, terrestrial, what's going on. Not intelligence, but just give me situational awareness. Who's operating in that Gulf? Where do they come from? Where are they headed? You know, time-relevant answers to combatant commands in tactical surveillance, reconnaissance, and tracking. And as you go down the list of capabilities, that spectrum changes. So where SATCOM can be very heavily commercial, missile warning, probably not. That's an inherently governmental function, no-fail mission. We're probably going to own most of that. Counterspace, probably going to be mostly government-owned, government-operated. But there's a spectrum of opportunities for commercial as you go down that path.
And the cuts are obviously, or that limited budget environment is not just systems. There's also some reduction in force that's going to be happening. Your acquisition folks, personnel, are all, I assume, relatively highly qualified people, right? Or you don't want to lose to the private sector. Are you anticipating those cuts affecting your programs, and what impact would that have?
There will be impacts. You know, we haven't let anybody go yet, so we haven't felt the impacts. But there will be some impacts. Like I said, we are the smallest force. We're 15,000. We have about 9,500 in uniform, and we have about another 5,600 in our civilian workforce. So any hit to that small 15,000 workforce is going to be felt. We are just making sure that we are communicating to everybody what the challenges are going to be, the talent that we're losing, and then what opportunities we might have to offset that. And we're just kind of going through it, but we're following the same rules that everybody else is following in the federal government.
And when it comes to encouraging innovation and encouraging acquisition to move quickly, I would point out that like SDA has not had a great year so far. They've had various challenges, right? Where do you see the future of SDA going? Any sort of thoughts on it?
Yeah, the Space Development Agency has a very bright future. They are kind of our lightning rod for cultural change and how we look at filling out some of these problems and embracing commercial. They are building out PWSA, which is basically a proliferated LEO SATCOM. They're building out a LEO missile warning, missile defense type capability. They're looking at alternate PNT. They're looking at air moving target indicator. So I think the future of SDA is very, very bright. You mentioned they've kind of had some stumblings this year. But when they're pushing the limits of technology and the limits of the relationships with commercial as hard as they're pushing, they are also pushing hard on the industrial base. We're going to see them stumble a little bit, but it's nothing that I don't think we can't recover from, and I think their future is extremely bright.
Yeah. I'm going to slip in one last more question until we start the Q&A. But when it comes to the space industrial base, Obviously, you guys aren't an economics agency. You're not necessarily trying to make sure every single last bit of America has a slice of the pie. And what meaningful decisions can Space Force make when it comes to making sure we have a diversified industrial base? Is it pushing it out to the most number of suppliers, encouraging education? What's the role?
We work really closely with the acquisition executives, both space and air, as well as the defense acquisition, ANS, to look at the health of the industrial base. And we try to identify what we call the pinch points in the industrial base, whether that be connectors, it could be tanks for us, could be IC chips, a lot of attention on IC chips, a whole lot of different array of capabilities. And then we are also trying to take it the next step further and say it's not just about the Space Force industrial base, it's about the national industrial base and what are the interconnections of all of that. And where can we possibly invest or diversify our capabilities to get more capabilities for the nation. So we spend a lot of time within the Pentagon having those kind of conversations and then working with our partners on the Hill, our stakeholders on the Hill to say, if we invested in this company and got excess capacity in IC chips, this is how it would affect our economy, this is how it would affect our ability to defend the nation, this is how it would affect the price of our weapon systems, all that good kind of stuff.
Great, I think I'm gonna open it up to questions. If you could just state your name and affiliation. There's someone with a mic around. Yeah.
Thanks, Erin Logan, a former DASD. Curious how you're looking at, you mentioned the need for multiple entities to work together to make this effective, but for Space Command, you obviously have a very distinct mission, but we also see the services with different missions, different priorities in space, where they really want to replace a lot of systems with space, which aren't the same things that you need for your mission, and just how you're looking at that balancing act and how industry can support those dual priorities, especially at this time of contraction.
I'm not necessarily following your question as far as not our mission. Our mission is to provide the joint force with space-based capabilities and to protect and defend those capabilities so that they can count on them during times of crisis or conflict. So we're having conversations on air moving target indicator, moving that from air to space, or actually blending it with air and space, not moving it. That is a Space Force mission that we are taking on to do moving target indications from space. All of those missions are for the joint force, for the nation, provided by the Space Force, and that's kind of the way we're looking at it. But I'm not sure that's exactly the question you were asking.
I guess it's more the prioritization is what I'm thinking about, because in some cases,
Yep.
advancing ground capability by replacing maybe a legacy system with a space system, it might take you 5 years of a big investment that would be a different priority than it would need at the front edge of space defense, like if any system already exists.
Yep.
I guess it's that conflict of priorities that I'm wondering about.
Yeah, and I would say we have a very robust conversations with the Deputy Secretary of Defense on balancing across the services and balancing across the domains. And more importantly, how do I integrate that capability across domains? And if I'm asked to take on something else, I just say either I can't do this or I need additional TOA. And when we're the smallest force with the smallest amount of money, generally I'm coming back and saying, hey, I can take on EMTI, but I need additional obligation authority to be able to deliver that capability.
We're here.
Hey, General, thanks. Chris Engdahl from Ursa Major. So part of the POTUS ask in Golden Dome, the last part is, hey, bring me whatever authorities you might need to accomplish this. So question to you, what would be an authority that Space Force would ask for that they don't already have to make this happen?
I think the authority that we would ask right out of the gate is the authority to do on-orbit training and testing that we're not capable of doing today. It's a very constrained set of authorities that we have to do on-orbit test and on-orbit training, and we would ask that open up so that we can increase our readiness of our forces on the front line to be able to do that protect and defend mission.
Time for one very quick one.
Sorry, Courtney Albin from Defense News. I'll try to make this concise, but wanted to go back to your discussion around inefficiency. How do you square kind of the way that you think about inefficiency with, you referenced a cultural push for efficiency, the administration's kind of, focus on efficiency, and are you worried that cuts could affect, your need for excess capacity, your need for a cushion in the industrial base? And if I can add to that, as you look at kind of this 8% cut and potentially divesting and things like that, what are the mission areas that already have that, inefficiency built in where you think you could take risk to pull programs back or, cut systems?
I think the inefficiency is built into all organizations just fundamentally. I can't necessarily say, hey, this is my least efficient unit, therefore I'm going to cut that unit or cut that capability. That doesn't exist. We've got to go in and look at where I can optimize better. A lot of the legacy stuff we need to optimize better and then start buying out new kit, new capabilities. For example, we still operate our satellites in the old way. I have operators sitting at a console flying one satellite by one operator. Industry has proven with the new developed systems, I can do lights out operations, I can fly autonomously, I can use artificial intelligence, I can do all that. How do I take advantage of that new technology to start getting efficiencies in some of my legacy systems? So we're looking at that kind of stuff on the upgrade side going forward. But on the inefficiency side, my conversation was more about efficiency, not inefficiency. We've become very efficient in the way we fight. We have one unit type code that I can send out to solve one problem, but that unit type code is only one deep. If I lose that unit type code, that unit per se, I don't have a bench behind them to go after. Same thing with my industry partners. I have one sub-supplier who can give me that propulsion tank, and if they go out of business or they get hit by COVID or they get hit by a tornado or what have you, I don't have a backup because we've leveled very efficiently leveled our industrial base. We've got to get more comfortable with inefficiency to have redundant capabilities, proliferated capabilities, lights out capabilities, because if we do have to go to conflict with a near peer, we're going to need that bench strength to be there during a really bad day.
I think that's about all we have time for. Thank you so much, General.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.